forgive my video response because I just can't get it together to write everything down with a ton of other things in written form that I'm coping with and all the rest of it. So it's just a quick verbal response. There are three topics, and they probably have some sort of colorful Venn overlap. So I'm going to ask you to recognize that I'm only really interested in the areas of overlap, but it's up to you to figure out what percentage is involved. If we look at the overlap of these three circles, and you can decide how much each one sort of intrudes into that central space. I mean, one might be only 9%, and another one might be 74% or something like that. And I have no idea. So I'm offering them to you as things that should be recognized as different things, but it's up to you to decide or reflect upon how they interact for you and to what extent for each. Okay, now that I've drawn pictures and circles in the air, what am I talking about? One is what I've written about a couple of times. I know you've seen it on the blog, and I've actually made a video about it before in the past. And it has to do with the legacy of playing champions in particular, and how that relates to superheroes and how that relates to killing. And I can't summarize it all here. I can only talk about one of the effects, which is that longtime champions role players are obsessed with and terrified of and always in a defensive crouch about killing. Whether it's their characters being killed, whether it's about their characters would kill another, and the extent to which they feel backed into a corner, that they are in imminent threat of their characters being dropped in their tracks, and that they have to muscle up and armor up and go ruthless as hard as they can, or else they simply are going to be taken out. And then we put that kind of into the fraught state of being a comics reader in the late 80s, um, where not only this topic was raised, which is, I think, a reasonable topic to raise as fiction, but also raised in an ahistorical haze. The idea being that, throughout all the whole history of superheroes, that they never ever killed, and that goody goody superheroes didn't do anything so batty bad as killing. And then all of a sudden, Miller had ripped the lid off, and oh my God, we can kill now. And is that good? And oh boy, we get to kill. And of course, that's all Wolverine too, with not only the Miller Claremont Wolverine, but all the build up to it regarding the Byrne Claremont Wolverine, and it's just all fraught. And being ahistorical has a tendency to, crawl up its own butt, basically. So all of this, I know, has imbued the history of playing champions to such an extent that it's almost inescapable. So one of the elements that I remember that really plays into this is this sense um, of pushing the villainy so far past the moral event horizon. I mean, you start over it, then you go further, and then you go further, and the villainy just is so villainous and so unrepentant and so born killer and so reprehensible in whatever variable you want, whether it's the murderousness of the villains themselves or their sadism, or um, their social values, which are so past anything imaginably forgivable. And so you're basically daring the heroes to kill them. You're basically saying, look, I am presenting to you this wretched caricature, or historically justified, or historically accurate, or whatever. But I am showing you the worst of the worst, and and I'm basically daring you to do one of two things. One of which is to say, but the hero does not kill, and show what a good comics person you are, or show what a good role player you are, or basically also, however, get punked because you're, saying, well, yeah, I guess I wouldn't kill even this person, even though you have in gruesome detail and in so many ways shown me why I should. Um, that in any other medium, they would basically be taken out. And then the other thing, which is sort of equally being punked, is to go ahead and do it and then have, the whole comic book world or the whole world of GMing or everything, look at you and shake your head and say, oh, well, you are, a non-idealistic, I guess you're just an edge lord. I guess you're just a Wolverine junkie. I guess you're just the 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 dark side of the Dark Knight, and you're just one of those. I guess you would just vote for Jason Todd being killed, um, if you will recall that event in comics. Okay, so that's the history, and remember, this is only one of the circles that I want to talk about, but it's just known. I mean, this is there, and the rules of Champions, one of the primary rules flaws of the original, and then the sort of spiraling that it took, to the idea that any fight is effectively a death match. It's effectively a cage match, and there is no other real option. Everything else is just crap. Kind of this candy ass excuse for fiction, um, that the circumstances of the fight and the nature of the foes basically means that we sort of forget its gravity and we just go to some sort of lame ass, turning them over to officer friendly, and the police, whom we have shown in 10,000 different ways are corrupt and worthless, all of a sudden are just going to take over and everything will be fine. This has drawn the comics into the strangest places, and anyway, I need not go further into it. You know the history. You know the role that is had this interplay with this game in particular, um, and it shows up again and again. I mean, it showed up already. With your whatever reason it was that you needed those agents to have killing attacks, that kind of thing. But so it kind of creeps in. However, it creeps in for you, to what extent this intrudes into the overlap, which is your actual play, is just something for you to know about. Okay, so and it's not just you, of course, it's everybody at the table. Okay, that's number one. Number two, is an interesting, observation on your presentations. Um, the the controlling GM, or if you will, the controlling participant, who could easily be somebody who's not GMing. All those techniques are available to them as well, and they will use them. Is also a writer. And so, in role playing terms, that means they are writing forward as they play, and it also means that they are anticipating as they prepare. And in fact, they're never not in a state of preparation and closure of the prepared. That's the only state that mindset knows. So they're constantly in a state of preparation and constantly in a state of control of outcomes. And their assessment, of course, of their success is to what extent this is under control. Well, you have been very careful in your presentation to point out, that you are not doing this, and I have no reason, I believe you, basically. I have no reason not to, and it all seems very clear that you're not. But it is also true that this habit, this set of possibilities, and you referred to it regarding the socialization of play among the people you're playing with, as well as any number of others. And I hear you on all that. I agree. Um, and I'm talking about for myself as well. The extent to which this kind of creeps up and manifests And in some cases, as you're playing, you kind of have to elbow, the little gremlin in the temple and say, down boy, you're not involved here. This is not your activity. Um, and it shows up for you in terms of when you talk about whether you expected something. And the good news, of course, is the extent to which this hasn't really, taken over in play. But when you talk about how, something happens and then the players do something or don't do something, and you're saying, well, I didn't expect that. This is worth thinking about. To what extent that expectation, actually manifested at all as an expectation, um, to the point where that's different from simply saying what they did surprised me. You could have a lack of expectation and still experience surprise. Um, and I'm pretty sure that that's the case most of the time. It's just kind of interesting. It's worth reflecting upon when you realize, oh, I did have expectations. Now, the cool thing in what you talked about, and I think what eventually gave rise to these remarkable emotional responses, which are great to experience and great to see you reflecting upon. The the idea that there's a different process of discovery. You knew, as you say, Marva's backstory, and they didn't. So that meant that they were going to have to go through stages of response. And the same thing goes for the slaying or the judicial execution of the racist Dennis guy. Um, and the same thing goes for their processing of who is Prometheus Bellows. What is he like? Um, which is not quite the same as saying, what is Prometheus Bellows as a plot device with whom we are to interact in order to be properly playing with this GM who clearly has a plan. Now you were a little bit wary of this. You're like, are they responding to this NPC as basically just my affable plot device? And so we go where he leads, and we do, we respond to what he says. When he says, "Oh no, we must dot dot dot." Okay, oh no, we must dot dot dot. Well, that's right to be wary of that. And so I think what I'm saying is I saw with you as you discussed it that they're not doing that. So if they're not doing that, then the next insight, and it is again, recognizing that this little gremlin appearance of the writer, in our own heads, um, is when they go through their own process. Players go through their own process of information processing and discovery, and it usually has a couple of steps because they don't know the backstory and they're processing it through the information they're receiving, and they're processing it through the actions that their characters take at any given time. And so, therefore, it's going to seem like they're not getting it, when in fact, the stepwise process is entirely exactly what we would expect, except we're blinded by the fact that we're playing in the moment and we have the backstory and we're kind of going, oh, why did they interact like that? Why did they not respond, to horror and stopping the dude from taking the head? And why are they going to town on this poor, victimized, animal person? Oh wait, okay, they don't have the story. Now, even better, you weren't in the position of saying, oh no, they're not going the right way, I better provide the backstory right now so they know what to do. No, in fact, you don't have to. In the You don't even need to consider any such thing because the players are on it. They are seeking the information, and they have characters who, as we have seen, are addressing what it means to fight supremacy and to deal with the rigors of the Great Depression. I mean, they're doing everything you said, like right in front of your eyes, and they're doing it in the ways we would expect, by processing their characters' actions, by thinking about what they're going to do, by seeking information, by uh, choosing and building the relationships. They have relationships now with Marva. They have they have a relationship with Bog, although he doesn't know it yet. Um, it's also pretty cool to see the your account of the players interacting with each other about this and not simply seeking cues from you. And this is fantastic. This is where you can really, stun the little rider gremlin with a hammer and say, this really isn't your game. This you have no place here. Go, go wait your turn when I feel like going and writing a story somewhere. Um, I am in a different process where I too, I'm having my responses and I'm having my commitments appear. The degree of authenticity in your account is showing that this is happening. Um, so that's the second circle, is this business of recognizing that the urge to write is very strong and it's very deeply ingrained in our habits, and that when you really take pains to evict it and then let things go where they will based on play, the payoff is astonishing. I mean, absolutely astonishing how much better it is this way than manipulating people into the point where you say, okay, now have your emo moment. And everybody kind of fakes their emo moment and we all congratulate each other on being good role players. And how much better it is the way you've described it. And mainly that's occurring because, at least it's occurring in part, because you are resisting the the urgings and the anxieties of the writer. A great deal of what the writer would think is their sense of responsibility to bring up the conflicts and to pick and choose which ones are going to come into focus and out of focus so that they're balanced or something, or tuned to one another in some way. And then when it all kind of crunches into a confrontation, then all of a sudden the writer will step in and smooth the way and adjust the result and bring in the right dialogue at the right time and things like that. Well, you're discovering that the procedures of play, the available procedures, presence attacks, and so forth, as well as many others, the timing of the actions, which again, I think the speed chart is showing its virtues here. Um, that not being able to act at a particular point is actually a virtue of this system. Then we also have the role of checking in on the now and everything you talked about, with the mini now of within the scenes of, okay, where is Marva while this is going on? What does she get a chance to see, and what does she respond to about that? What is her approach? How does that affect how she interacts, both in terms of imminent violence and in terms of interaction with others, um, verbally? So all of this just does what it does, and were it to come out as a tragedy, were it to come out as a triumph, were it to come out in any fashion at all, we could actually look back and see that as causal from what everyone has done. The writer doesn't need to be there because you're not alone. You're not alone in producing the fiction. Everybody else is doing their parts, and everybody is working off of asymmetrical knowledge. It may seem as though you have the bulk of the knowledge, like the backstory of the character, the non-player characters and all that stuff, and that they're kind of paddling along trying to keep up. But if you step back and look at the processes of play that you have described, you'll discover that you're the one with the lesser amount of asymmetrical knowledge. After all, they're playing the heroes. And their knowledge base, which is developing, it is more of a wave front than a fixed and known quality of the values of their characters is vast. It's much bigger than your information. So you are actually the one who's paddling to keep up, and it's a wonderful sensation. So those are two circles, and they definitely overlap. So for part three, may actually be the most difficult to process. And I barely ever talk about this. The only time I really dug into it was with somebody specifically following a full game that we had played. And it was even with somebody who I think is one of the best oriented um, and the most savvy, you know, thinker on all these topics of play. And it was taboo territory. It was dark territory to proceed into, and took care and took um, you know took caution and sort of mutual handholding to do this. And that is the assessment of content given successful play. We I think it's kind of testimony to the broken history, um, that we stop upon achieving successful play. We say, oh goodness, that was the achievement. We have actually done the medium. We have actually done this thing, and the qualities and features that I've been talking about, especially a moment ago, strike us as such an achievement, such an accomplishment, that we are stunned. We're amazed at ourselves. Huge pat on the back. Look, look. We held up instruments and we went toot toot and we made music together. I mean, that in of itself is just like so shocking that it worked. But if you think about it in terms of any other medium, that's pretty low hanging fruit. That's not a real high standard of accomplishment. So after 50 years of the development of role playing, a great deal of which you and I have experienced firsthand, I think we might want to raise our bar a little bit. We might want to say, all right, now that we have done it, is it worth doing? Are we what have we said? What have we done? What is it like? What you know? Not that anyone made any mistakes. In fact, because nobody made any mistakes in terms of screwing up the medium itself, is what we did any good. And the only judgment that's being made is literally upon ourselves, our own intuitive aesthetic contributions. Yes, it was your job to, do X, Y, and Z for a given game. Speaking to any person at the table, and for any game, they had a job. And if they did that job and they did it well in the sense of its into the sense of participation, what more could we ask? Isn't that what we've been struggling toward all this time? And the answer is yes, we have been struggling toward it all this time. But by the way, there's something else to ask. There is something else to assess. Now that we know we can do it, the next question is, what have we done? And this came to be in a particular game. I'll have to ask the person whether it's okay to kind of reveal this conversation. But suffice to say that the game had been played quite nicely and successfully with the three of us, and I had been playing one of the player characters, and it all went fine. Except that I thought, upon reflection, in fact, during play itself, I was like, I'm not enjoying this aspect of it, not because it's going over a line, and not because it is badly done or being incompetently handled or anything of the kind. But because I just think that the aesthetic choices being made here are kind of lame. Wow, that's really a bad thing to say. I mean, yes, it was your right to play the character a particular way. It was your right to frame a scene in a particular way, depending on whom we're talking to at the table. It's your right, it's your job. It is not my place to critique that. And in terms of the moment of play, no, it was not certainly my place to critique that, and I did no such thing. But afterward, we're looking at it aesthetically. We are genuinely saying, what have we wrought? And the answer is, yeah, right there, that decision, it was yours to make, and you didn't make a great one. And this is normal. This is something that, in terms of writing, in terms of drama, theatrical drama, in terms of cinema, in terms of anything that we call fiction, is certainly a thing that a creator would want to assess. And yet, if for us, this is hideously fraught territory. I mean, this is terrifying. And I think that one thing that you've demonstrated here is that upon reflecting and upon looking at it, and you say, and what we did is, hey, wow, I'm glad I did this. And note, and I thank you so much for this, note not with that usual nonsense of, and it would be such a good movie. No, it doesn't have to be a good movie. It was good role playing. And that's our art. That is our medium. That is what we do. And that's where it needs to be thought of as whether it is good or not. And to achieve that without turning the medium into itself a form of cinema or of theatrical drama, or as has often been said, some form of radio theater, to have achieved this, first of all, as itself and not doing those other media in disguise, and then to say that the aesthetic judgment of our contributions is, in this case, something to be proud of, something to be joyous about. And I also think it's important not to expect that it can be. I mean, certainly not every story written, and certainly not every play produced, and certainly not every particular achievement of this kind is going to be, you know, a triumph. In fact, it's worth looking at it and saying, yeah, no, that one was, we did it, and it was good in the sense that it was crafted, in the sense that we did our jobs, and it is indeed a story. It wasn't as good as it could have been. And we couldn't have made other choices at that time. That's right. These things have their own location and place and time. And that particular time wasn't, amazing in terms of content, even though in terms of execution, in terms of participation, in terms of all the things that I usually talk about, it was fine. And relative to all this broken ass play of all these years, for so many people and in so many ways, along with the less verbalized and less discussed triumphs of play. But in relation to all this broken ass play, what we did was, in fact, a triumphant accomplishment because it was actually competently done. And then we look at it and say, and competence is fine, but that is low hanging fruit. And we are looking up a bit at whether what we did was content wise any fucking good. And it was only okay. And that happens. And I don't think it's anything to be ashamed about. I mean, every musician or every practitioner of any art, fictional or otherwise, knows that this is just an ongoing thing. And we don't even have the vocabulary to talk about developing our quality past the point of competent execution and participation. We can only do that. And I think that's what I'm seeing here. And that's the third circle, right, of these topics that I'm bringing up and how it overlaps with the other two. Again, well, I guess you'll tell us or reflect upon it. We'll come back to this, years later and see what became of it.